Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Now, Starfleet as an entity is one that is generally dedicated to peace, but it is not afraid of war. But human beings are always going to be human beings, and many human beings suffer from PTSD, shall we say, from various different kinds of conflict throughout history, domestic abuse, war, all kinds of things. Now, a war with a race like the Cardassians can cause some pretty serious PTSD. And that can manifest in many different ways. Sometimes people can learn to mask it, to hide it, and even with an organization like Starfleet, with all the care and attention and needs met, sometimes a person perhaps doesn't realize the problem, they don't realize the full scope of the problem, and they just let it fester. That is more or less what happened to Captain Benjamin Maxwell, the commanding officer of the USS Phoenix, NCC 65420. This ship was commissioned in 2363, but in 2367 it would go vigilante. So let's talk about the little escapades of the little ship that could. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and all likes and things of that nature are greatly appreciated, as this channel is growing and I do want to dedicate more of my time to making the videos for it. And every like I get, every dislike I get, are all helping with the engagement. So thank you in advance. If you enjoy this, please subscribe and hit the bell notification icon if you think it's worthy, because that is the real subscribe button, as we all know. The USS Phoenix was a Nebula-class starship. This was part of a stream of variants of the Galaxy-class space frame. The Galaxy-class, of course, was considered the pinnacle of Starfleet and Federation engineering during the golden age of exploration. Similar to the Constitution class that had come before it 100 years earlier, variants using components of the ship would be built. One such example in relation to this would be the Miranda class, and many components of the Miranda class came from the Constitution class. Someone in Starfleet thought that's a good idea, and it was. They took the basic saucer section and a few other bits and pieces from the Galaxy class and they kind of kit bashed them and rearranged them, building a slightly more compact and variable space frame than what the Galaxy class was. The Nebula class was less of a generalist and more of a specialist at doing certain jobs, but it was given a modular design. This particular variant had a large additional sensor saucer attached to the dorsal section of the aft compartment of the vessel. This gave the ship massive sensor enhancement. Other Nebula-class ships could be equipped with different types of modular components at the rear. These included different types of sensor arrays, enhanced shuttle bays, medical facilities, and importantly for the upcoming Dominion War and the previous Federation Cardassian border conflicts, an enhanced weapons array and shield system, as well as other tactical enhancements that came from a specialist pod of that nature. Most Nebula-class ships received a sensor module of one form or another, although this particular configuration was only seen aboard the USS Phoenix. Although, as I said, these were modular, Starfleet had a habit of they'd build lots of them and just swap them out when needed. In other words, they'd bring in the ship, they'd go, right, you're going to go out on a different mission, the mission profile has changed, so we're going to swap out your module and give you a tactical module rather than a sensor module. This meant you didn't have to build different versions of the same starship. You would have several vessels out at once which would have different particular configurations in use, but if needed, you could build additional vessels to have the modules. So you could bring in, if you're in a combat situation or in war, you bring in 10 in the Nebula class, strip off the sensor domes, and stick on 10 weapons ports or medical facilities or whatever you need the Nebula class particularly to be doing in that conflict. And when your conflict is over, you take the weapons pods back off, put the sensor pods back on, send the ship on its way with no other modifications needed. Very versatile design, an excellent starship, and it proved itself in combat during the Border Wars, a war that Captain Maxwell fought in, and took away from that war an experience and trauma in dealing with the Cardassians and a deep, seething mistrust of them. It's understandable considering the Cardassians' typical battle tactics that they would use during the war. Maxwell kept an eye on the Cardassians, and Starfleet wouldn't believe him when he was convinced that they were basically up to something in 2367. He took his ship rogue and began attacking Cardassian ships and outposts. The USS Enterprise D was dispatched to work with Gul Macet in order to try to bring the Phoenix home and stop it from continuing to attack Cardassian bases. Maxwell was not responding to long-range communications and was adamant when the Enterprise did catch up with him that the Cardassians were building secret bases and were stockpiling weapons for a second offensive against the Federation. But he couldn't provide any evidence of this, merely his observations of their fleet movements and communications. Picard forced him to bring his ship back into Federation space following the Enterprise, allowing him to stay in command of his ship so he didn't have to suffer the indignity of being removed from command. This was a mistake. Maxwell would break off and renew his attacks on the Cardassians, or at least try to force Picard to search a freighter. Up to this point, Picard had demonstrated his willingness to try to preserve the peace at all costs, going as far as to give the Cardassians the prefix codes for the Phoenix's shields, meaning that Cardassian attacking warships could drop the shields of the Phoenix and engage it without its defences online. However, the Nebula-class ship is a pretty robust, sturdy vessel. It was able to weather the attack even with its shields down, and considering the superiority of Federation weapons technology over that of the Cardassians, again, even with its shields down, the Cardassian ship at full strength, it was able to destroy the attacking Cardassian warship, killing hundreds of Cardassians instantly. This, combined with his other attacks, led to the deaths of several thousand Cardassians overall. Now, these actions were considered an act of war, but at the end of all of this, Picard's warning to the Cardassians that even though he had no evidence, it was obvious to Picard that not everything here was above board, that there was something to Maxwell's claims, and that the Federation would be watching. Now, because of that little warning and this obvious evidence that the Federation, although perhaps going rogue was the wrong way, it showed that the Federation was not going to simply take another attack on the chin. The Cardassians would back down after this. Captain Maxwell was talked down by Chief Miles O'Brien and managed to slip through his shields by doing some clever transporter action, and basically talked him down and showed him that Starfleet wasn't going to back him on this. Starfleet was always going to take the route of peace. And that what had happened to him, the loss of his family, which is what had caused much of the trauma, was not an excuse for what he was doing. And unfortunately, though he was probably right, his actions condemned him and many of his crew to court-martial and likely dishonourable discharge and potentially even prison. But the Phoenix itself, an example of an excellent piece of Starfleet engineering. The Nebula-class vessel has always been a more combat-orientated variant of the Galaxy-class. Like the Galaxy-class, it does have certain weaknesses in that because it's built with the same saucer and other things, the Galaxy-class space frame has never been the most robust or sturdy, but the more compact, sort of shielded, sort of closed-in design does give it some edge over the Galaxy-class. It's a bit more manoeuvrable, it's a bit more sturdy, and it's a bit harder to hit. But it has powerful shields, advanced weapons, and is in a straight fight almost as powerful as the Galaxy class in, weapon-to-weapon combat. But does have the tactical edge in being a slightly more tactically orientated vessel. And its versatility and utility, with its variable weapons pod to sensor pod to shuttle pod, whatever, gives it a certain something, an edge, over the fairly stock jack-of-all-trades design of the Galaxy-class starship. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.